I am Julian Carter, 34 years old, and tonight, I systematically dismantled my father's 42-year legacy in less than 3 minutes flat. While I was standing at his lavish retirement gala, bathed in the glow of expensive chandeliers, my own parents allowed me to be publicly humiliated. My father looked out at a crowd of 200 high-powered executives, raised his crystal glass, and said the words that would officially end our relationship forever. He said that he owed everything to his oldest son, and that his youngest son never had what it takes. They all laughed. They actually sat there in their tailored Italian suits and expensive evening gowns, sipping $1,000 champagne, and they laughed at me. But there was one crucial thing they did not know. They had absolutely no idea that I was the new senior technical director of the massive conglomerate that had just bought his entire company out from under him. And right now, as I drive away into the cool Los Angeles night, he is standing in the middle of that suddenly silent ballroom, clutching a small navy blue box, absolutely screaming in sheer, unadulterated panic. Before I tell you exactly what happened and how I took back my power, hit that like button if you believe in justice. And please, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Your support means the world to me. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The Hilton downtown was radiating the kind of sterile corporate wealth my father built his entire identity around. I had arrived exactly 20 minutes early. I did not arrive early out of respect, or because I was eager to celebrate the man who had made my childhood a living nightmare. I arrived early because anxiety has a funny way of making you overcompensate. I pulled my black Porsche 911 up to the grand entrance. The valet, a young kid in a crisp red vest who looked like he was barely out of high school, rushed over. His eyes widened slightly at the sleek curves of the car. I handed him the keys, feeling a strange, intoxicating mix of accomplishment and deep, unsettling dread. This car was a symbol of my hard work. It was the physical manifestation of my late nights, my grueling promotion, the massive salary I now commanded in the aerospace industry. Yet, stepping onto the plush red carpet of my father's meticulously planned event, I felt like that awkward, invisible 12-year-old boy all over again. I felt like the kid who was never quite loud enough, never quite aggressive enough, never quite enough of a shark to earn a place at the family dinner table. I did not go straight into the ballroom. I simply couldn't. The thought of facing the sea of judgmental faces made my chest tighten. I ducked into the men's room, locking myself in one of the oversized, marble-lined stalls just to breathe. I stood in front of the sink, gripping the cold stone edges until my knuckles turned stark white, staring at my reflection in the mirror. I looked successful. My charcoal suit was perfectly tailored. My hair was neat, but my eyes looked incredibly tired. I had spent the last 2 solid weeks rehearsing a safe, neutral speech. A polite toast to a man who had never been a real father to me. I wanted to take the high road. I wanted to show them I was above the petty family drama, above the endless comparisons to my brother. In my inner jacket pocket rested a small box wrapped in thick navy blue paper, tied perfectly with a silver ribbon. Understated, elegant. Inside was something deeply meaningful. At least it used to be. It was the only piece of physical evidence I had that my father had ever cared about me. I touched the fabric of my jacket, feeling the hard edges of the box against my chest. I wondered if giving it to him tonight would finally bridge the massive gap between us. I was a fool for even entertaining the thought. The air in the hotel hallway smelled of expensive musk cologne and roasted prime rib. The clinking of crystal glasses and the low hum of self-important chatter echoed from behind the heavy mahogany doors. My father, Richard Carter, was a man who operated his family exactly like a high-stakes corporate real estate transaction. You either provided a massive return on investment, or you were deemed a liability and swiftly cut loose. For 42 grueling years, he climbed the blood-soaked ladder at his engineering firm, crushing anyone in his path, eventually taking his seat on the throne as CEO. The company was not just his job. It was his religion. His legacy was his entire life. I adjusted my tie, forcing my heart rate to slow down. I took a deep, shaky breath and pushed the heavy wooden doors open. The ballroom was a sprawling sea of crisp white linens and towering floral centerpieces that cost more than my first car. Waiters in pristine white jackets floated through the room, carrying silver trays of caviar and champagne. A giant, high-definition projector screen looped a meticulously curated slideshow of grayscale images behind the main stage. It was a montage of my father shaking hands with military generals, presenting awards to other stiff men in suits, and pointing authoritatively at blueprints. Power poses. I stood there and watched the screen loop 3 times. There were absolutely no family photos in the mix. There were no snapshots of childhood birthdays. There were no pictures of messy Thanksgiving dinners. There were no photos of my mother, Evelyn, standing proudly by his side. And there was certainly no evidence of a beating human heart. Just cold, hard, calculating ambition. Emotion would have contaminated the polished legacy he was trying to project to the world. I stood near the back entrance, hovering in the shadows near a massive ice sculpture, watching him hold court. He was flanked by wealthy board members and sharp-toothed corporate lawyers, laughing his booming, artificial laugh. He was the retired king, basking in the absolute adoration of his subjects. I waited for him to look my way. I waited for just a nod. Just a glimmer of recognition that his youngest son had made the effort to fly across the country and show up. He didn't. Instead, he turned to my older brother, Harrison. He clapped Harrison firmly on the shoulder, pointing him out to a group of investors, beaming with the exact kind of pride I had spent my entire life starving for. I felt the old, familiar sting in my chest, a physical ache that I thought I had buried years ago beneath layers of success and therapy. I thought I was ready for this. I thought I had built enough armor, earned enough money, and achieved enough status to render his approval meaningless. I thought the worst of the pain was over. I was so incredibly wrong. Growing up in our sprawling, perfectly manicured suburban Texas home felt like living in a strict, sterile museum where you weren't allowed to touch the exhibits. We weren't poor by any stretch of the imagination. My father made an exorbitant salary, but love, warmth, and basic human affection were rationed out like they cost extra. My brother, Harrison, was the undisputed golden child. He was the All-American high school quarterback, the confident, loud leader, the boy who would eventually go to an Ivy League business school and step right into my father's meticulously crafted mold. He was aggressive, competitive, and entirely devoid of empathy. He was exactly what my father wanted. And then there was me. I was quiet. I was fiercely curious. I liked tearing apart broken radios and old lawnmowers in the backyard to see how the engines worked. I read heavy physics textbooks under my blanket with a flashlight while the rest of the house slept. While Harrison was out winning enormous gold trophies that were proudly displayed in the center of the living room, I was locked in the dusty, sweltering garage, building model rockets from scrap metal, baking soda, and copper wire. I remember one specific Thanksgiving dinner vividly. I was 14 years old. The house was packed with relatives, the dining table groaning under the weight of expensive catered food. My Aunt Sylvia, my father's sister, was a woman who treated every family gathering like an opportunity to manipulate the narrative and stir up toxic gossip. She looked across the massive roasted turkey and asked my father about his son's futures. "Well," my father said, puffing his chest out, his voice echoing in the dining room, "Harrison is going to take over the operational division in a few years. The boy has a brilliant mind for leadership. He's a shark. He knows how to cut the fat and drive profits." Aunt Sylvia smiled her thin, reptilian smile, took a slow sip of her red wine, and pointed a manicured, accusatory finger directly at me. "And what about Julian? Who gets custody of the family daydreamer when he inevitably fails out of community college?" The entire table went dead silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. My father did not defend me. He did not tell his sister to back off and mind her own business. He just gave a tight, dismissive chuckle, the kind of laugh you reserve for a bad joke told by a superior at work. "Julian is creative," my father said slowly, dragging out the word. "We will see if he figures it out. If not, I suppose there is always retail management." He said the word creative like it was a terminal disease, like it was a massive failure of genetics. The silence at the table felt like a cold, damp funeral. I looked at my mother, Evelyn. I desperately wanted her to say something. I wanted her to tell them I was smart, that my science teachers praised my work, that I had built a functioning radio from scratch. But she just looked down at her expensive porcelain plate, entirely too afraid to cause a family argument or an outright divorce over a single insult. She actively chose the manufactured piece of the house over the breaking heart of her son. She was complicit in the abuse, wrapping her cowardice in the guise of being a supportive, traditional wife. But there was one single memory I held on to. One tiny, pathetic spark of hope that kept me tethered to him for decades. I was 12 years old, and I had entered the fiercely competitive district science fair. I spent 4 months building a fully functioning scale model of a satellite using recycled aluminum, a small motorized axis, and a complex wiring board I bought with my own allowance. My mother practically had to threaten my father with a public argument to drag him out of his home office to attend the event. He stood in the crowded, echoing middle school gymnasium, his arms crossed tightly over his chest, checking his gold watch every 2 minutes as if he were mentally calculating the exact amount of money he was losing by being forced to stand there among ordinary, working-class parents. But then, the head judge walked to the microphone and called my name. First place. District champion. I walked up to the podium, my hands shaking violently, holding my shiny blue ribbon, and for exactly 5 minutes, my father looked at me with genuine pride. A local newspaper photographer snapped a picture of us standing next to my project. His large hand was resting heavily on my small shoulder, and he was smiling. A real, genuine smile. Not the polished, fake grin he used for corporate brochures and quarterly earnings reports. That photograph was the only tangible, physical proof I had that I mattered to him. I kept it hidden in a worn manila folder at the bottom of my closet for 22 years. It was my secret weapon against the darkness of my childhood. When it came time for college, things took a remarkably dark turn. Harrison had his exorbitant tuition paid for in full. There was a massive, fully funded college fund waiting for him, complete with a generous living stipend and a brand new luxury SUV. When I got my acceptance letter into the University of Michigan for their elite aerospace engineering program, I was ecstatic. I ran to my father's study, clutching the paper, thinking this would finally be the moment he respected me as an intellectual equal. He didn't even look up from his laptop. "I am not funding a hobby, Julian," he said coldly, his voice devoid of any emotion. "If you want to study rockets and play with space toys, you figure out how to pay for it yourself. I only invest in sure things. You are not a sure thing. So I did it myself. I worked brutal, exhausting night shifts at a freezing logistics warehouse, loading heavy boxes until my back screamed in agony. I took on massive, crippling student loans that terrified me every time I looked at the balance. I ate cheap ramen noodles while my wealthy peers went to expensive frat parties and took ski trips to Aspen. I studied until my eyes blurred and my head pounded. I graduated with highest honors, sitting at the absolute top of my engineering class. On the sweltering day of my graduation, I sat in the vast, crowded stadium, the sun beating down mercilessly on my black gown. I searched the massive crowd of cheering families, desperately scanning the bleachers for my parents. I looked for my mother's bright yellow dress. I looked for my father's stern face. The seats I had specifically reserved for them remained completely empty. Hours later, as I was walking back to my empty dorm room alone, carrying my diploma, my phone buzzed in my pocket. A single text message from my father. "Congrats. Didn't realize that was today. Good luck." That single text message broke something fundamental inside me. It snapped the last, fraying thread of naive hope I had been clinging to for over 2 decades. I did not reply. I packed my meager belongings into my beat-up sedan, drove out of Michigan, and moved to California. I decided right then and there that I would never beg for a seat at his table again. I was going to build my own table, and I was going to make it bigger, stronger, and far more powerful than his. The Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena, California, is not a place for the weak. It is a high-stakes pressure cooker filled with the brightest, most intensely driven minds in the world. When I started as a junior systems analyst, I put my head down and worked like a flawless, relentless machine. I didn't care about office politics. I cared about the math. I submitted complex patents that saved the department millions in development costs. I co-authored groundbreaking papers on deep space radiation shielding. I lived, breathed, and consumed my work. I was fortunate enough to catch the attention of a mentor, Dr. Eris Thorne. Eris was a towering figure in the aerospace industry, the kind of man whose mere recommendation could make or break a career trajectory. He was demanding and rigorous, but incredibly fair. He saw the fire in my eyes. He treated me with more respect and dignity in our first 5-minute meeting than my biological father had in a lifetime. But the corporate climb wasn't easy. I had a coworker, a guy named Gareth, who constantly tried to undermine me. Gareth was a classic corporate climber, a master of taking credit for other people's labor. He reminded me entirely too much of my brother, Harrison. During a critical project review with the board of directors, Gareth attempted to present my complex data models as his own, trying to secure a massive promotion for himself. But I didn't back down. The days of me shrinking in the corner were completely over. I calmly pulled up the digital footprint, the time-stamped code, and absolutely destroyed his argument in front of the entire division. By the time I was 31 years old, I was promoted to senior engineering director. The salary bump was astronomical. The stock options were staggering. But the money, the massive 401k, the luxury apartments, none of it truly mattered. The validation did. I had proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that my hobby was changing the world. Then, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, everything I thought I knew about my difficult past shattered into a million jagged pieces. I was undergoing a rigorous interview process for a top-tier government security clearance. The investigators needed some extremely obscure financial records from my high school years to verify a discrepancy in my past addresses. I logged into an old, highly disorganized family cloud drive that my mother had shared with me years ago to retrieve some old tax documents. While scrolling through hundreds of mundane files regarding the family real estate properties, I accidentally clicked on an archived, hidden folder simply labeled Education, Harrison, and Julian. My curiosity got the better of me. Inside were scanned letters and PDF documents. My heart completely stopped when I saw a scanned letter with the official, embossed letterhead of an Ivy League university. It was a letter from their admissions office, dated back to when I was 18 years old. They had offered me a full-ride, merit-based scholarship. A scholarship worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. A scholarship I never, ever knew existed. My hands began to shake violently. I clicked on the next document. Attached to the acceptance letter was a long email chain between my father and the university's director of admissions. My father had written, "Thank you for the generous offer regarding Julian. However, Julian will not be accepting this scholarship. We have decided as a family that he is needed in our local business operations. He does not have the discipline for a university of your caliber. Please withdraw the scholarship offer and allocate the funds to another student." I stared at the glowing computer screen, the harsh white light burning into my retinas. The air in my office suddenly felt too thin to breathe. He had not just refused to pay for my college. He had actively, maliciously sabotaged my only way out. He intercepted my physical mail. He lied to a prestigious university. He wanted to clip my wings, permanently cripple my future. So I would be forced to stay in Texas, working a miserable, low-level job under Harrison, completely and utterly dependent on his wealth and control. It was a calculated, vicious betrayal. It was the kind of financial and emotional abuse that made me immediately consult an attorney about a potential lawsuit, though the statute of limitations had long passed. My own father had tried to ruin my life just to maintain his grip on my throat. The man I had spent my entire childhood trying to impress was the exact same man who secretly plotted my downfall. 3 weeks later, the thick, cream-colored, heavily embossed invitation arrived in my mailbox. My father's retirement gala. I stared at the elegant cursive font, feeling a surge of pure disgust. I tossed it straight into the kitchen trash can. My best friend, Oliver, who had been my rock through college and knew every single toxic scar my family had given me, poured me a glass of expensive scotch that night. "Let it go, Julian," Oliver said, handing me the glass. "They are toxic waste. They aren't worth your energy. Let them rot in their fake little world." I fully intended to ignore the event, until my phone rang the next morning. It was my mother. "Julian, please." Her voice was fragile, trembling over the phone line, thick with unshed tears. "Please tell me you are coming to the gala. This is final night. The entire industry will be there. The board members, the press. If you don't show up, people will talk. They will ask questions. Please don't do this to the family." "Do this to the family?" I echoed, my voice dropping to a dangerously low, icy whisper. "Mom, he hid my scholarship. He actively stole my future. I saw the emails on the family drive. He tried to ruin my life." There was a long, horrifying silence on the other end. She knew. She had always known. "He just wanted you close, Julian," she cried, her voice cracking as she desperately defended him like she always did. "He just didn't know how to show his love. He was afraid of losing you to California. Please, just put on a suit and come. Just for me. Think about your inheritance. Think about the family image." I closed my eyes, feeling a profound sense of mourning for the mother I never truly had. She wasn't calling because she missed me. She was calling to protect his inheritance, his public image, his flawless corporate reputation. "I will be there," I said softly. I hung up the phone. I walked over to the trash can, pulled the heavy invitation out from under the coffee grounds, and smoothed the wrinkled paper on my granite countertop. I wasn't going to California for my mother, and I certainly wasn't going to celebrate my father's legacy. I was going because it was finally time to collect my debts. The atmosphere inside the Hilton ballroom was thick, pretentious, and utterly suffocating. I walked slowly through the massive crowd, my posture perfectly straight, my expression an impenetrable, stone-cold mask. The old Julian, the frightened boy from Texas, would have slouched his shoulders, trying desperately to make himself smaller, hoping to avoid criticism. The new Julian owned the room without speaking a single word. It did not take long for the family vultures to begin circling. Harrison spotted me near the open bar. He strutted over, holding a glass of amber liquid, looking exactly like a sleazy politician in his overly tight tailored suit. His teeth were unnaturally white, his hair slicked back perfectly. "Julian," Harrison said loudly, making sure his voice carried over the jazz music so the wealthy executives nearby could hear. "Look who decided to grace us with his presence. You actually made it out of the basement. Are you still playing with your little space toys out in California? Or did you finally get a real job?" A few older men in the circle chuckled obediently, swirling their expensive drinks. I looked at Harrison calmly, taking a slow sip of my sparkling water. I didn't flinch. I didn't show an ounce of anger. "We just successfully landed a $2 billion rover on the surface of Mars, Harrison," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly modulated. "So yes, the toys are working out pretty well. How is the regional sales division treating you? Still struggling to hit the quarterly quotas Dad set up for you?" His smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A muscle in his jaw twitched violently before he recovered his composure. "Right. Well, Dad is about to speak on the main stage," Harrison sneered, leaning in close so only I could hear the venom in his voice. "Try not to embarrass us tonight. Stand in the back and keep your mouth shut. You don't belong here." He turned on his heel and walked away. I watched him go, and to my own surprise, I didn't feel rage. I just felt an overwhelming, crushing sense of pity for him. Harrison was a prisoner locked inside a golden cage made entirely of our father's unrealistic expectations, and he didn't even realize the door was locked from the outside. Needing a moment of quiet before the formal program officially began, I slipped out of the main ballroom and into a dimly lit, carpeted hallway leading toward the catering kitchens. It was empty and quiet. As I turned the corner toward a small alcove, I stopped dead in my tracks. Standing in the heavy shadows, speaking in hushed, conspiratorial tones, were my father and a man I hadn't seen in over 15 years. Marcus. Marcus was my old high school physics teacher. He was the one who had originally encouraged me to build that satellite for the science fair. He was the one adult in my childhood who I thought had actually believed in my potential. I pressed my back against the cold, textured wall, holding my breath, listening intently. I really appreciate the new position on the corporate advisory board, Richard. Marcus was saying, his voice greedy and low, thick with sycophancy. The salary bump will really help with my upcoming divorce. The lawyers are draining me dry over the custody battle. You earned every penny, Marcus? My father replied smoothly, his voice dripping with arrogance. Keeping Julian's head out of the clouds and feeding me his little project plans back then kept the boy from getting too arrogant. You gave me the leverage I needed to keep him grounded. Too bad the boy never actually learned his place. But your loyalty to my firm over the years is highly valued. The floor completely dropped out from under me. Marcus, the teacher I trusted, the man who wrote my college recommendation letters. My father had bought him off. He had literally paid my own teacher to monitor me, to feed my dreams and ambitions back to him so my father could calculate exactly how to crush them before they grew too big to control. My father had used Marcus's financial troubles, his divorce, and his custody issues to turn him into a corporate spy against a teenage boy. I gripped the wallpaper, my breathing turning ragged. My father had rigged the entire game against me from the very start. He had orchestrated a massive, decades-long campaign to ensure I remained a failure. I didn't step out and confront them. I didn't scream or throw a punch. The molten rage inside me suddenly condensed, freezing solid, hardening into pure, unbreakable diamond. The final shred of guilt I felt for what I was about to do vanished completely. I turned around and walked purposefully back into the glittering ballroom just as the heavy crystal chandeliers dimmed. The event manager, a flustered, frantic woman named Fiona wearing a headset, tapped a microphone on the center stage, asking the 200 guests to please take their assigned seats. I didn't sit. I remained standing near the front edge of the room, right in the direct line of sight of the podium. The hired MC, a man with a booming radio voice, took the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, tonight we gather to honor a true titan of industry. A man whose relentless vision and unyielding dedication have shaped the aerospace landscape for over 4 decades. Please welcome to the stage, the one and only Richard Carter. Thunderous, deafening applause erupted throughout the massive hall. My father walked onto the stage, waving his hand modestly, soaking in the absolute adoration like a sponge. He approached the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked out over his kingdom. Thank you all so much, he began, his voice dripping with a practiced, false humility. This journey has been the privilege of a lifetime, but I want to make one thing perfectly clear. I wouldn't be standing here tonight without the unwavering support of my family. He paused dramatically, gesturing widely to the VIP table at the front. My oldest son, Harrison. Please stand up. Harrison stood, buttoning his suit jacket, beaming as the crowd clapped. Harrison is the absolute future of this company, my father continued, his voice swelling with pride. He has the strength, the sharp vision, the brilliant mind of a true leader. Everything I have built, I owe it all to him. The crowd clapped even louder. Then, my father's cold, calculating eyes flicked to the shadows where I stood. His expression hardened instantly into a look of absolute, unadulterated disdain. He leaned closer to the microphone, his voice dropping into a somber, theatrical tone. But the hard truth of life is that not every child is cut from the same cloth. Some simply do not have the drive. Some just want to play in the dirt while others build empires. My youngest son never had what it takes. A low, uncomfortable murmur rippled through the wealthy crowd. Someone at the front table, one of Harrison's frat brothers, let out a sharp, mocking laugh. It was a highly calculated, incredibly cruel public execution of my character. He wanted to destroy me right there in front of his peers, to ensure that everyone in the industry knew that his only true heir was Harrison, and that Julian was nothing but a pathetic disappointment. I didn't shrink away. I didn't drop my gaze. I reached into my tailored jacket pocket and pulled out the small, navy blue box. I took a slow, deliberate, powerful step forward out of the shadows and into the blinding spotlight. The crowd, sensing the heavy tension, parted around me like the Red Sea. The storm had finally arrived, and I was holding the lightning. The silence that fell over the Grand Hilton ballroom was absolute, profound, and incredibly heavy. It was the kind of thick, suffocating quiet that usually precedes a devastating car crash, a massive natural disaster, or the reading of a highly contentious will at a grim family funeral. 200 of the most powerful, ruthless executives, distinguished corporate board members, and sharp-toothed lawyers in the global aerospace industry sat completely frozen at their lavishly decorated tables. The polite, continuous clinking of heavy crystal champagne flutes had ceased entirely. The highly trained servers in their pristine white jackets stood paralyzed against the dark mahogany walls, holding heavy silver trays of caviar and roasted prime rib, instinctively sensing that something terribly wrong was about to happen. Every single eye in that massive, opulent room was locked directly onto me as I stepped out from the heavy shadows at the back of the hall and began my incredibly long, deliberate walk down the center aisle. The plush, intricately patterned red carpet absorbed the physical sound of my footsteps, but my presence in that room was louder than a gunshot. I kept my posture perfectly rigid, my shoulders squared, and my expression entirely void of any readable emotion. I was no longer the frightened, invisible 12-year-old boy begging for a tiny scrap of validation in the sweltering Texas heat. I was no longer the teenager forced to buy his own cheap school supplies at Walmart while his brother received a brand new luxury vehicle. I was Julian Carter, a 34-year-old man who had built an undeniable empire from the ground up, completely independent of his toxic family. And right now, walking down that aisle, I was holding the literal, physical key to my father's total corporate destruction in the palm of my right hand. Up on the brightly lit main stage, my father, Richard Carter, watched my incredibly slow, measured approach. His initial expression of unadulterated, public disdain began to morph into something else entirely. It became a dark, venomous, highly condescending amusement. He leaned his heavy elbows on the polished wooden podium, casually adjusting his incredibly expensive Italian silk tie. I knew exactly what was running through his fiercely arrogant mind. He actually thought I was walking up there to beg. He genuinely, wholeheartedly believed that I was approaching his throne to offer a pathetic, highly emotional plea for his love and acceptance in front of his wealthy peers. His towering ego, consistently fed by 42 years of corporate dominance and completely unchallenged authority within our abusive family structure, completely blinded him to the terrifying reality of the situation. He operated under the delusion that he held all the cards, that my meager salary and position at the Jet Propulsion Lab were nothing compared to his massive 401k and extensive real estate holdings. My older brother, Harrison, was sitting at the VIP table situated directly below the main stage. He shifted uncomfortably in his plush leather chair, his unnaturally white teeth biting down hard on his lower lip. He leaned over to one of the senior vice presidents of the regional sales division and whispered something behind his hand. A smug grin plastered across his face. I did not need to hear the specific words to know it was a cruel, degrading joke about my mental state. Harrison was desperately trying to maintain his fragile status as the undisputed golden child and the sole rightful heir to the massive family inheritance. He was performing for the executives, proving he was the shark my father raised him to be. I reached the bottom of the carpeted stairs leading up to the main stage. Fiona, the highly stressed event manager wearing a black headset and carrying a thick clipboard, stepped forward frantically. She held her hand out to physically block my path, her eyes wide with professional panic. "Sir, I am so sorry, but you absolutely cannot go up there," Fiona hissed, her voice trembling with intense anxiety. "We are strictly following the approved run of show." Only scheduled speakers and approved board members are allowed on the platform during the keynote address. Please return to your assigned seat immediately before I have to call security. I did not look at her. I did not verbally acknowledge her presence in any way. I simply kept my eyes locked fiercely on my father and took another deliberate, heavy step forward. The sheer, terrifying intensity radiating from my physical demeanor must have thoroughly frightened her, because she immediately dropped her hand, clutched her clipboard tightly to her chest, and stepped rapidly back into the deep shadows of the stage wings. She knew, instinctively, that this was not a standard corporate disruption she could manage. I climbed the 5 stairs slowly. Each individual step felt like a profound, monumental reclamation of my own soul. When I reached the absolute center of the stage, I stood exactly 3 feet away from the man who had actively, maliciously sabotaged my college fund, intercepted my university scholarship letters, and paid my high school physics teacher to operate as a corporate spy. The glaring, high-wattage stage lights beat down on us, hot, bright, and completely relentless, exposing every single line on his aging face. "Julian," my father said, leaning slightly into the microphone so his deep, commanding voice boomed aggressively across the silent room. "What exactly do you think you are doing up here? This is a highly professional gathering of industry leaders. We are discussing massive aerospace contracts and corporate strategy. We do not have time for one of your dramatic, highly emotional outbursts tonight. Please return to your seat right now before I have hotel security escort you out of the building." He was actively laying the groundwork for his audience. He was expertly setting the trap, framing me as the unstable, jealous, mentally fragile younger brother. He was ensuring that whatever action I took next would be viewed exclusively through the lens of a pathetic, childish tantrum. It was an absolute masterclass in narcissistic manipulation, a toxic tactic he had consistently utilized to control my mother, terrify me, and dominate every single room he entered for my entire existence. I did not speak. I did not offer a defense against his accusations. I simply raised both of my hands, my fingers perfectly steady, and held out the small box wrapped in thick navy blue paper, tied immaculately with a silver ribbon. My father looked down at the box, then back up at my face. A smug, deeply condescending smirk spread across his thin, cruel lips. He thought it was a pathetic peace offering. He thought I had drained my savings account or taken out a ridiculous loan to buy an expensive Rolex watch or a set of diamond-encrusted cufflinks just to buy a tiny fraction of his approval. He looked out at the massive crowd of executives, playing directly to his captive audience, soaking in their attention. "Well, ladies and gentlemen," my father announced, his tone dripping with thick, heavy sarcasm that echoed off the high, vaulted ceilings. "It appears the prodigal son has decided to bring a tribute after all. Let us see what Julian considers an appropriate retirement gift for a lifetime of actual, grueling hard work and unprecedented corporate success." He snatched the box roughly from my hands. He did not say thank you. He did not show a single ounce of grace, humility, or paternal warmth. He violently yanked the elegant silver ribbon, letting it drop carelessly onto the polished stage floor like a piece of worthless trash. He tore the expensive navy blue wrapping paper with rough, incredibly impatient fingers. He was rushing, eager to reveal what he fully assumed would be a disappointing, completely inadequate gift so he could deliver his final, crushing public insult and secure his legacy. He pulled the lid off the small cardboard box. He looked inside. For a terrifyingly long moment, the entire world seemed to completely stop spinning on its axis. The smug, arrogant smirk on his face did not slowly fade. It was instantly and completely obliterated from existence. His bushy gray eyebrows furrowed together in profound, genuine confusion. He reached his large, manicured fingers into the box and pulled out the old, slightly faded photograph. It was the picture of us at the middle school district science fair. The one where I was a fragile 12-year-old boy, holding my blue ribbon tightly, and he had his hand resting on my shoulder, smiling a genuine, unforced smile. My father stared at the photograph, his highly calculating mind struggling to process why I would walk onto a stage in front of 200 powerful people to hand him a piece of garbage from 2 decades ago. He let out a sharp, incredulous laugh, violently shaking his head in disgust. "A middle school science fair photo?" he mocked, holding the picture high up for the front row of board members to see clearly. "This is your grand gesture, Julian? I am retiring from a multi-billion-dollar engineering empire. I am dealing with massive salary negotiations and corporate mergers. And you bring me a dusty picture of a tin-foil toy you built in the garage? This is exactly why you will never succeed in the real world. You live entirely in the past. You have no concept of real value, real estate, or real power. Keep looking, Richard," I said. My voice was incredibly calm, but it carried the crushing weight of an anvil. It was the very first time in my 34 years of life that I had ever addressed him by his first name. I did not call him Dad. I did not call him Sir. With that single, deliberate word, I completely stripped him of the authoritative title he had abused and weaponized for decades. His eyes snapped up to meet mine. The complete, terrifying lack of fear in my voice clearly unsettled him to his core. The smirk vanished entirely. He looked back down into the cardboard box. Beneath the photograph was the small, handwritten note I had carefully penned earlier that afternoon on heavy cardstock. He pulled it out, squinting at my precise handwriting. He brought the paper closer to his face, and I watched his lips move silently as he read the words to himself. "This was the last time you looked at me like I mattered. I spent 20 years chasing that version of you. From your biggest failure. I am done now." He violently crumpled the note in his fist, his face turning a dangerous, explosive shade of crimson. The thick veins in his neck began to bulge against the stiff white collar of his tailored shirt. He was preparing to unleash a torrent of verbal abuse. He was preparing to yell for the security guards, to humiliate me, to have me physically dragged out of the Hilton by my collar. But there was one final item resting at the very bottom of the box. It was a heavy, custom-milled piece of solid black titanium. It was exactly the size of a standard corporate business card, but it weighed significantly more. The edges were sharp, precise, and ice-cold. "What is this absolute nonsense?" my father spat, reaching his trembling fingers deep into the box to retrieve the piece of metal. He pulled the titanium card out and held it up to the harsh stage lights to read the laser-etched silver lettering. I stood there, my feet planted firmly on the floorboards, my heart beating a slow, incredibly powerful rhythm against my ribs. I watched his eyes scan the intensely brief text. I watched the exact, agonizing millisecond his brain registered the information. I watched the blood completely and totally drain from his face, leaving him looking like a pale, hollowed-out corpse. His jaw went entirely slack. The heavy titanium card began to tremble violently in his shaking, clammy hand. I thought the worst of the pain was over when I discovered his betrayal with the college fund. I thought the trauma had peaked. But standing there, watching the sheer, unadulterated terror completely wash over the man who had tormented me my entire life, I realized the storm wasn't ending. The storm was just beginning, and I was the one controlling the wind. My father could not breathe. He opened his mouth to speak, to yell, to demand an explanation, but only a dry, pitiful, raspy wheeze escaped his tightening throat. The heavy titanium card slipped directly from his trembling fingers, hitting the polished wooden floor of the stage with a sharp, incredibly loud clack that echoed endlessly through the dead silent ballroom. I did not wait for him to recover his breath. I did not give him a single second to formulate a lie, a corporate spin, or a manipulation tactic. I turned sharply to my left, where Fiona, the event manager, was standing completely frozen near the massive soundboard. I held out my right hand, palm up. "Give me the microphone," I commanded. My voice was not overly loud, but it carried absolute, terrifying authority. Fiona did not argue. She did not check her run-of-show clipboard. She looked absolutely terrified, caught in the direct crossfire of a brutal corporate execution. She hurried across the stage, her high heels clicking rapidly, and handed me the wireless microphone. She immediately retreated back into the deep shadows, wanting no part of the incoming blast radius. I took the microphone, turned my back completely and disrespectfully on my father, and faced the sea of 200 powerful executives. I looked directly down at the VIP table. My mother, Evelyn, had both of her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with mounting, undeniable horror. Harrison was gripping the sharp edges of his table, his knuckles bone white, his smug, frat boy demeanor entirely replaced by deep, primal confusion and rising panic. He was suddenly realizing that his guaranteed promotion and massive salary were resting on a fault line. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice projecting crystal clear through the massive, high-fidelity speaker system, filling every corner of the room. "My father just stood before you on this very stage and stated that he owes everything to his oldest son. He stated clearly for the public record that I, his youngest son, never had what it takes to build an empire. He is right about one thing tonight. I do not build empires. I acquire them." A massive, collective gasp rippled through the front row of the audience. Several wealthy board members leaned forward in their chairs, their eyes darting frantically between me and my father, who was currently clutching the edges of the wooden podium, gasping for air as if he were having a massive cardiac event right there on stage. "For those of you in the audience who do not know me, my name is Julian Carter," I continued, pacing slowly and deliberately across the stage, owning every single inch of the space. "I have spent the last 10 years working silently and tirelessly at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena. I did not rely on family connections to get my promotions. I did not rely on the promise of a massive inheritance. I did not rely on a fully funded Ivy League education, because my father secretly contacted the university and forced them to revoke my full-ride scholarship when I was 18 years old to keep me trapped under his control." The room erupted into shocked, furious murmurs. I saw two highly paid corporate lawyers at a back table rapidly pulling out their cell phones, instantly sensing a massive, career-ending legal scandal brewing. My mother let out a sharp, piercing sob, burying her face completely in her shaking hands. She couldn't hide behind her pristine HOA meetings and country club luncheons anymore. The truth was out. "But that is ancient personal history," I said, raising my free hand to quiet the chaotic room. "Let us talk about the present. Let us talk about the magnificent corporate legacy my father is so desperate to protect and pass on." 6 months ago, my father's firm began seeking a massive, desperately needed capital injection to avoid total bankruptcy due to gross, undeniable financial mismanagement in the regional sales division. I paused, turning my head to lock eyes directly with Harrison, a failing division run exclusively by his golden child, Harrison. Harrison's face turned an ugly, mottled, furious red. He aggressively pushed his chair back and started to stand up, opening his mouth to shout an obscenity, but the sheer, crushing weight of the room's collective stare forced him back down into his seat. He was utterly powerless. My father's board of directors quietly and somewhat illegally negotiated a hostile corporate takeover behind closed doors. I explained, breaking down the highly complex corporate maneuvering with the cold, precise articulation of a surgeon performing an amputation. A massive, incredibly wealthy conglomerate named Vanguard Holdings swooped in and systematically purchased 62% of the voting shares. They bought the lucrative aerospace patents. They bought the highly classified government contracts. They bought the entire commercial real estate portfolio, including the very building you are all currently sitting in. I turned slowly, pivoting on my heel, and looked directly at my father. He was gripping his chest, his eyes filled with a terror so deep, so absolute, it bordered on clinical madness. What my father and his army of highly paid lawyers completely failed to realize, due to their unbelievable arrogance and total lack of basic legal due diligence, I said, my voice echoing like thunder over the crowd, is that Vanguard Holdings is a subsidiary shell company. And as of yesterday morning at 9 a.m., the board of directors officially appointed a new senior technical director to oversee the entire acquisition, the aggressive restructuring, and the liquidation of this firm. I pointed a firm, unwavering finger down at the heavy titanium card resting on the floor near my father's expensive, polished leather shoes. "I am the new senior technical director of Vanguard Holdings," I declared, the truth ringing out like a bell. "I am the sole individual in this entire corporation with the executive proxy to liquidate every single asset this company owns. I own the aerospace patents. I own the commercial real estate. I own the legacy. I own you." Absolute pandemonium broke out in the ballroom. Several executives jumped to their feet, shouting questions. The noise was deafening, but I wasn't finished. I needed to cut the final toxic string. I needed to expose the rot completely, to leave absolutely no stone unturned. I scanned the dark, chaotic corners of the room until I found the exact face I was looking for. Marcus, my old high school physics teacher. He was standing near the glowing red emergency exit sign, looking desperately for a way to escape the room before the fallout hit his reputation. "And speaking of corporate integrity," I said, raising my voice significantly over the chaotic chatter to ensure everyone heard me clearly, "a piece of highly relevant advice for the remaining board members in attendance. If you are looking for loyalty and trust, I highly suggest you immediately reconsider the recent appointment of Marcus to your advisory board. Unless, of course, you enjoy employing a man who actively accepts illegal cash bribes to spy on a teenager. A man who happily reports a child's science projects back to an abusive father to ensure the boy's college funds and dreams are crushed before they can ever threaten the family hierarchy. Isn't that right, Marcus? I sincerely hope the massive corporate salary bump helps pay for your incredibly messy divorce and your ongoing, highly contested custody battle." Marcus turned a sickly, ghostly white. The wealthy executives standing immediately around him physically took a large step back, looking at him with absolute, unmasked disgust. Realizing his career and reputation were instantly incinerated, he pushed open the heavy emergency exit doors and bolted out into the dark alleyway, completely disappearing into the Los Angeles night. I turned slowly back to my father. He was a shattered, broken shell of a man. The arrogant king had been entirely stripped of his crown, his castle, his wealth, and his dignity in less than 3 minutes. "Your retirement is incredibly well-timed, Richard," I said softly, but the high-quality microphone picked up every single chilling syllable. "Because as of 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, Harrison's entire operational division is being completely and permanently dissolved. His guaranteed promotion is gone. His massive, unearned salary is gone. The corporate accounts are frozen. There is absolutely no inheritance left to leave him. You built a toxic, abusive empire on the backs of others, and tonight, I am burning it straight to the ground." "You absolutely cannot do this to me," my father suddenly screamed, his voice shattering the remaining tension in the room. It was a guttural, terrifying, animalistic shriek that completely shattered whatever tiny, remaining illusion of dignity or corporate poise he possessed. He lunged awkwardly away from the wooden podium, his hands grasping desperately at the empty air, as if he could physically catch the words I had just spoken and violently shove them back into my mouth. "This is my company. This is my entire life's work," he bellowed, spit flying from his lips. His face contorted in absolute, terrifying fury and deep, existential terror. "This is Harrison's rightful inheritance. You have absolutely no legal right to touch those corporate assets. I will unleash a lawsuit so massive, so destructive, it will bury you for the rest of your miserable, pathetic life. I will tie you up in court until you are bankrupt." I looked at him with profound, heavy emptiness. I did not feel the fiery, triumphant joy of revenge that I thought I would feel. I did not feel the urge to gloat or laugh. I just felt incredibly, deeply tired in my bones. I was looking at a small, pathetic, terrified old man who had actively traded the love and loyalty of his own child for a corporate title that was currently evaporating into thin air right before his very eyes. "The paperwork is already signed, Richard," I replied coldly, dropping my voice so low and steady it commanded absolute, terrified silence from the screaming crowd. "The SEC filings were approved this afternoon by the federal regulators. Your highly paid lawyers already cashed their massive retainer checks from Vanguard Holdings. You have absolutely nothing left to sue with. Your golden inheritance is entirely void. I reached forward, calmly picked the heavy titanium card off the wooden floor, and dropped it directly into his trembling, sweating hands. Keep it as a souvenir of your incredible success, I said. I did not wait for his response. I did not wait for the inevitable begging or the next round of empty threats. I handed the wireless microphone back to Fiona, who took it gingerly, as if it were a live, ticking grenade. I turned my back completely on the stage, the podium, and the man who had ruined my childhood, and began the long, quiet walk back down the center aisle. The massive crowd parted for me in absolute, stunned silence. The powerful, wealthy men who had laughed at me less than 10 minutes ago now actively avoided my gaze, staring intensely down at their expensive polished shoes, terrified that I might look at them next. As I passed the VIP table, Harrison stood up abruptly, knocking his chair over backward. His face was a mask of panicked, pathetic desperation. "Julian, wait, please, let's talk about this like rational adults," Harrison pleaded, reaching his hand out to physically grab my sued arm. "We are brothers. You can't just take my salary away. I have a massive mortgage on the new house. I have expensive car payments. I have a lifestyle to maintain. What am I supposed to do?" I stopped walking and slowly turned to look at him. I looked at the golden child, the ruthless shark, the anointed corporate heir, completely and utterly begging for financial mercy from the brother he had mocked his entire life. "You should have learned how to build something yourself, Harrison, instead of just taking credit for other people's work," I said quietly, my voice entirely devoid of sympathy. I sharply pulled my arm away from his desperate grasp and kept walking toward the exit. I pushed through the heavy mahogany doors, leaving the suffocating heat of the ballroom behind, and stepped out into the cool, refreshing Los Angeles night air. The valet rushed forward immediately, sensing the intense urgency and power in my stride, and quickly pulled my black Porsche 911 up to the curb. I handed him a crisp $100 bill, slid into the low, comfortable leather seat, and pressed the ignition button. The powerful engine roared to life, a deep, satisfying mechanical growl that vibrated through my bones and grounded me in reality. I merged aggressively onto the highway, rolling the tinted windows down, letting the cold, salty wind whip fiercely through the cabin. For the first time in 34 agonizing years, I could take a full, incredibly deep breath without feeling the crushing, toxic weight of my family's expectations bearing down on my chest. I felt light. I felt dangerous. I felt completely free. Before I had even driven 5 miles down the interstate, my cell phone, resting in the center console, began to explode. It vibrated violently, lighting up the dark interior of the car with an endless, frantic stream of notifications, text messages, and missed calls from Texas area codes. I did not answer a single one. I let every call go directly to voicemail. When I finally pulled into the secure, underground parking garage of my luxury apartment building an hour later, I turned off the engine, sat in the quiet, comforting darkness of the car, and pressed play on the messages. The first voicemail was from Harrison. His voice was a chaotic, unhinged mix of intense, screaming rage and pathetic, hyperventilating sobbing. "Julian, you vindictive, absolute psychopath. You completely ruined my life. Dad is having a severe panic attack in the hotel lobby. The paramedics are here. The board members are literally walking out and ignoring him. My promotion is gone. How am I supposed to pay for anything? You are dead to me. Do you hear me? You are legally dead to me." I pressed delete. The golden child was finally experiencing the real world. The second voicemail was from my father. He sounded completely unhinged, his voice hoarse from screaming. "You listen to me, you ungrateful little bastard. I am calling my lawyers right now. I will drag you through a massive lawsuit for your own sanity. I will freeze your assets. I will personally destroy your reputation at the Jet Propulsion Lab. I will call Dr. Thorne. You are a massive failure. You will always be a failure." I pressed delete. He didn't even make logical sense anymore. He was just desperately throwing legal buzzwords into the void, completely powerless, screaming at the wind. The third and final voicemail was from my mother, Evelyn. Her voice was incredibly weak, high-pitched, and trembling with dramatic, manufactured sorrow. "Julian, please, oh God, please call me back right now. Your father is screaming about a divorce. He is blaming me for raising you this way. The country club is already gossiping. The entire family image is completely, utterly ruined. Feels like a funeral in this house. How could you humiliate us like this in public? We are your parents. We gave you life. Please fix this. Call the board and tell them it was a joke." I sat in the dark car, gripping the steering wheel, listening to the heavy silence after the message ended. They were all entirely consumed by the loss of their money, their social status, and their flawless public image. Not a single one of them apologized for the college fund. Not a single one of them asked how I was feeling. Not a single one of them cared that they had broken my heart 1,000 times over. I deleted the final message, turned off my phone completely, and walked upstairs to my apartment. I locked the door, took off my suit, and slept for 10 hours straight. It was the deepest, most peaceful, unbroken sleep of my entire life. 6 months later, the chaotic dust had finally settled, but the entire landscape of my life was completely unrecognizable, in the best possible way. I was standing backstage at a massive, state-of-the-art convention center in downtown Los Angeles. The Jet Propulsion Lab had officially asked me to be the main keynote speaker for the annual STEM Summit. I was there, officially, to present the complex findings from our latest deep space radiation shielding project, but I knew, and the organizers knew, that the audience was also there for another reason entirely. The insane story of the retirement gala had leaked to the press. Incredibly sharp, highly talented investigative journalist named Nadia had caught wind of the hostile corporate takeover, the dramatic public confrontation, and the massive fallout. She did her research, verified the SEC filings, and wrote a brilliant, deeply moving viral article titled, "The Failure Who Bought the Empire." It detailed the horrific emotional abuse, the maliciously hidden college fund, the toxic family dynamics, and the ultimate, undeniable triumph of taking back my power and exposing the truth. The article exploded across social media and major news outlets. Suddenly, I wasn't just a senior technical director and an aerospace engineer. I became an unwilling, yet incredibly proud symbol for thousands of people who had grown up as the black sheep, the scapegoats, and the forgotten children in their own families. I received thousands of emails, direct messages, and handwritten letters from people sharing their own heartbreaking stories of surviving narcissistic parents, enduring extreme favoritism, and fighting to break endless cycles of generational trauma. "You're up in 2 minutes, Julian," the stage manager whispered, gently tapping my shoulder and handing me a cold bottle of water. I nodded, taking a slow sip. My mind drifted briefly to a small, unassuming envelope that had arrived in my secure mailbox 2 days prior. There was no return address printed on the outside. Just my name, Julian Carter, written in sharp, heavy block letters. Inside the envelope was the photograph, the exact same middle school science fair picture I had left in the navy blue box on that stage 6 months ago. Taped securely to the back of the photo was a small piece of expensive stationery with a handwritten note. It read, "I did not forget this day. I just tried to forget it because it scared me how much I loved that version of you. You deserved more than I gave you. I am sorry." When I had first read the note standing in my kitchen, a strange, powerful wave of complex emotion had hit my chest. I thought, for a brief, fleeting second, that my father had finally achieved some level of genuine clarity. I thought the devastating loss of his company, his wealth, and his public standing had humbled him enough to break through his titanium ego and offer a genuine, heartfelt apology for ruining my childhood. But then I looked closer under the bright kitchen lights. I looked at the specific slant of the letters, the exact way the loops on the Y were drawn, the pressure of the pen on the paper. I had spent my entire traumatic childhood desperately analyzing every single document, report card, and note in that house. I knew my father's aggressive, slashing handwriting perfectly. The note was absolutely not written by my father. It was written by my mother, Evelyn. She had painstakingly forged his handwriting. She had meticulously copied his rigid block letters, trying desperately to manufacture an apology that the man was completely, psychologically incapable of giving. She was still trying to play the ultimate peacekeeper. She was still trying to violently force a narrative of a happy, loving family. She was still trying to fix the aesthetic of our relationship without ever addressing the actual, bleeding, fatal wounds. It was a cowardly act dressed up as an olive branch. It was the ultimate, tragic confirmation that walking away was the absolute best, most correct choice I had ever made in my entire life. I didn't even feel anger toward her anymore. I just felt a profound, heavy, overwhelming sadness for a woman who was so deeply trapped in her pathetic role as the enabler that she would commit emotional forgery just to maintain the illusion of a family that never truly existed. I took the photo, placed it in a secure, fireproof drawer in my home office desk, and locked it. I didn't need the fake apology. I didn't need my father's validation or my mother's cowardly excuses anymore, because sometimes the apology you so desperately crave never comes. And true, lasting healing is realizing that you can survive and thrive perfectly fine without it. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's booming voice echoed through the massive auditorium, snapping me back to the present moment. Please welcome our keynote speaker, the Senior Technical Director of Vanguard Holdings and JPL Innovator, Julian Carter. I walked out onto the brightly lit stage. Thousands of brilliant young minds, aspiring engineers, scientists, and professionals clapped enthusiastically. The energy in the room was electric. I walked up to the podium, adjusting the microphone. I looked out at the massive crowd, feeling an overwhelming, undeniable sense of true purpose. I wasn't just building rockets to explore the stars anymore. I was helping real people realize they didn't have to stay grounded by the crushing weight of their past. Sometimes, I began, my voice steady, strong, and echoing powerfully through the massive room. The absolute greatest fuel for a rocket isn't fire, it's rejection. You are not obligated, under any circumstances, to relentlessly prove yourself to people who actively refuse to see your worth. Boundaries are not walls meant to keep you isolated in the dark. Boundaries are doors, and you hold the absolute right to decide who gets to walk through them, and who gets locked out forever. If your family, your boss, or your partner forces you to constantly shrink just to fit into their narrow narrative, walk away. Build your own table. Build your own empire. Because you are only truly a failure if you stop showing up for yourself. The crowd erupted into a massive standing ovation. The sound of thousands of people cheering was deafening, beautiful, and completely, wonderfully authentic. I stood there, letting the applause wash over me, knowing with absolute certainty that I had finally, truly found my way home. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to draw a hard line and walk away from the people who were supposed to love you the most? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey.